Okay, hi there. I'm Chris Chapwanya from OilNOW, and joining us today is Wazim Mowla and Lorraine Sobers. They're experts in their respective field, and we're going to be looking to have a discussion on oil and gas, particularly what is going on here in Guyana. Of course, we recently concluded the International Energy Conference where a number of persons were in the country from various fields, a number of heads of states, and the excitement that is happening offshore continues. And so we want to use this discussion to touch on a few key things. The conference, Guyana's right to produce, what is currently happening now with Russia's invasion of Ukraine, the spike in oil prices, and what that means. So before we get into it, I'll give you an opportunity to hear directly from Lorraine and Wazim as they introduce themselves. So Lorraine, if you would start off for us. Good day, and thank you for joining us.
Thank you. So I am a lecturer at the University of the West Indies. I actually come to you from a but very quiet campus today. I am a chemical engineer and a petroleum engineer. My area of interest and expertise is carbon emission reduction, especially within the field of petroleum engineering. So that is geologic storage, but I generally look at ways that we can have a sustainable energy sector, and one that looks at reducing CO2 emissions as best as possible.
Thanks, Lorraine. And I've seen a number of columns from you as it relates to the need for sustainable development of the oil and gas sector. And I don't think anyone would argue about that. We're going to touch on that a bit. Wazim, I'll hand it over to you for an introduction.
Thanks, Chris, and thanks for inviting me to be here. My name is Wazim. I'm the Assistant Director of the Caribbean Initiative at the Atlantic Council's Adrienne Arsht Latin America Center, and a non-resident scholar at Florida International University's Jack D. Gordon Institute for Public Policy. Mainly, I cover U.S. Caribbean policy, but also looking more particularly at small states and how they engage with great and rising powers, looking at a different number of themes that intersect with foreign policy, one of them being energy security. So really happy to be here.
Great. Thanks, Wazim, and thank you, Lorraine. So let's start off with some, feedback from the International Energy Conference held just a few weeks ago here in Guyana. The first major conference since we've been in this COVID-19 pandemic situation. A number of people came here to Guyana. Many people say, they've really, were happy with the opportunity to be able to get out. And there were a number of discussions that took place there, that really piqued the interests of persons there and elsewhere. First off, what feedback you would have gotten about the conference itself, how it went? Let me start off with that.
Well, I attended the conference virtually, and in the most basic way, it was very energetic. You could feel the energy, you can feel the optimism from the delegates, from the ministers and the companies and the dignitaries. It was very energetic, it was very optimistic, and I could feel the excitement in the air, even though it was virtual. I wish I was there. I mean, I kind of frown because, traveling now, it's not something that you would look forward to. But what was difficult for me sometimes to grasp is like a overall picture, like where is this going? Because like, this is a good idea, that is a good idea. And I felt it was difficult for me to just grasp the whole picture. And I don't know if I was missing something, but I'm piecing it together more and more. But I felt it was optimistic. Everything looked good, but really it's time will tell. So that's how I felt about the conference.
Thanks, Lorraine. Were you able to join any of those sessions?
Yeah, I was able to. And, I was unable to attend, and I would have loved to go back to Guyana to attend it. But looking at it from here in Washington, I really saw it as Guyana's sort of official welcome to the global energy stage. Especially in the pandemic and now that oil production is on the way. And I think what was important is that, the breadth of companies that both attended in person, but also virtually tuned in. And maybe even the most important thing was Prime Minister Mia Mottley from Barbados being there, because her speech and her arrival, not only has she become a regional voice, but she has now this international claim and clout, especially when it comes to speaking up for developing countries and some of the challenges they face, and particularly in the climate space. And her coming to Guyana to that energy conference to be able to say that Guyana can both produce its oil, but at the same time continue to address climate change and reap those rewards is a signal, I think, to other countries that may have been unwilling or a little bit hesitant to invest or engage with Guyana in this respective space, both in oil and in climate. And I think this is what it also does is it's really relevant when you think of US policy to Guyana, because the US clearly sees Mottley, Prime Minister Mottley, as sort of a regional voice and a gateway to future engagement with the Caribbean as a whole. And by her, in a way, stamping some sort of approval when it comes to Guyana's right to produce, it puts the US in a position that when it engages with the region, and if it sees Mottley as sort of this legitimate voice, it needs to account for Guyana's right to produce. So no longer, I know the Biden's administration is all about sort of being very focused on climate change, not really much on sort of oil production, but if they don't engage with Guyana in the oil and gas space, then they leave themselves open to the same criticism that the Trump administration had faced, which was dividing the region. So if you want to work with the region, you have to work with the region's biggest energy producer, or becoming the region's biggest energy producer, which is Guyana, and it has to include now hydrocarbons.
Great, and I'm glad that you mentioned Prime Minister Mia Mottley. Her speech, as you rightfully said, was well received. And I think one of the profound statements that she made was really hitting home the fact that net zero does not mean no oil and gas production, and that the need for oil and gas resources will continue into the 2030s, possibly beyond. As you well know, there are a number of persons, whether internationally here in Guyana, who share, various views as it relates to what Guyana should do with its oil and gas resources. And those views range from leaving it in the ground to proceeding at a slower pace in terms of the offshore development. Let's talk about, first of all, the importance or lack thereof of these resources to Guyana's national development. Where do you see Guyana going in the next few years, and how important do you think developing these resources is to that? And is there another way that we can get to where we need to go without tapping into the oil and gas resources?
Well, I'll try to answer the first part. Where is Guyana going? Overall, I believe what Guyana wants, what everybody wants for Guyana is development that's going to benefit the people of Guyana. That is improving the infrastructures, improving education, improving healthcare, those basic things. And there are a few metrics where Guyana is behind in the region and Latin America, and that should soon change. And so the basic Guyana is going towards a future that is better for Guyanese overall. That's first and foremost. I believe that's where local content fits in. That is where the low carbon development strategy also fits in. It's building a equitable and prosperous future for all Guyanese, and also being a player on the world stage, be it as a carbon forest or providing energy. And energy, the demand for energy is not going away. There are people who think that on a dime, you're going to no longer use oil and gas in the next 10, 20, 30 years. Oil and gas is more than fuel. It's a feedstock for a lot of what we use. Almost everything you can see and use, there is some use for that there. So I see Guyana playing a role in providing hydrocarbon, not necessarily as a fossil fuel forever, but also providing development for its people.
You've spoken a lot, Lorraine, about the need for us to develop these resources in a sustainable manner. And I think a lot of the concern that you see here also ties into what Guyanese see happening in other countries and other countries close to home, in so far as how they would have used, maybe not in the best way, those resources. I know that we've discussed this in general here in Guyana and elsewhere over and over again in terms of what Guyana needs to avoid. We're now about 7 years into it, if you come back from Lisa 1 discovery in 2015. From where we know Guyana is right now, we've just put in place a local content law. We have a natural resources fund that is activated. When we look at where Guyana is right now, do you have confidence in terms of the framework that the country seems to be putting in place? And does that tell you that, look, we're moving in the right direction, or potentially we're going to be having some problems down the road?
I think some what we'll call teething problems are inevitable. I just hope that it's not anything that will be a major setback. Am I confident? Really, it's 50-50. When I listen to what is going on, and the is sometimes it's a bit of a chicken and an egg, and it's like, is this sorted? Can we really support some of the bigger dreams and the bigger ideas that we have? Is it really going to go forward? But I would say I would keep it overall optimistic, because it's really step by step, and if the development paces itself in a way that learning and rectification could occur when needs be, I think there's a good chance in a good future. And there's a lot to learn from other countries. There's a lot to learn from even within the mining sector within Guyana on the way forward. So overall, I'm optimistic, but I'm still a little bit cautious, because I really want to see some of the institutions in place being strengthened and having that confidence in the capacity, not necessarily capability. There's that to be built also, but also, do we have enough strong enough institutions to build as quickly as we would like, but possibly would have to build a little bit slower. But overall, I'm optimistic.
Wazim, some of the concerns we've seen to relates to the environment, the environmental impact of extracting these resources, and of course, in the context of the world moving towards renewables. But is there a way you see, and I've seen some of the commentary that you would have provided in your columns, Guyana being able to use the very same oil revenues to help further its climate goals, to help move the country closer to a place where we're using more renewables?
Climate change, at a policy level, breaks down to a financing problem, right? And if you need to build, first, to invest in renewable energies takes money. Also, to build infrastructure that can help withstand the effects of climate change, both pre and post, takes financing. And Guyana, with its oil and gas revenues, has the seed capital to be able to do so, and to do so and put itself in a better position to do so than it can, other Caribbean countries, because frankly, the financial institutions are not set up in a way to basically help the Caribbean with what it exactly needs, right? A lot of them fall into the middle income trap. A lot of them don't have access to concessional financing. And even if they do, it comes with a lot of sort of structural readjustments that end up hurting working class populations in the region. So what Guyana has is an opportunity to use its own oil and gas revenue to basically address these issues. And what it does is it helps Guyana's global brand to say, look, we're not doing this, we're doing this for development, but we're not doing this just to produce hydrocarbons. We're doing this and we're putting it right back into the world to not just help itself to address climate change, but it can help neighboring Caribbean countries, it can help some Latin American countries. And we know that with money and with finances comes economic and then political clout. It could then take this global brand and take it really to a global and international stage and be on track to start to speak for all global South and all developing countries. So I think that it's not whether it should use these revenues to invest in renewable energies and to address climate change. It's almost a must, right? There's a responsibility now on Guyana on a regional and global level to do so.
And what do you say, and this is to both of you, to countries, particularly the developed countries? We saw recently at the COP26, where they're saying to countries like Guyana, other countries in West Africa and elsewhere that, hey, look, hold up, The world is moving toward renewables. You guys need to slow down with the oil production. What do you say to countries like those, particularly in the context of what Prime Minister Mottley and VP Jack Gill here in Guyana, the President, His Excellency Irfan Ali, and others have been saying on the other side of the coin that, look, we have a right to develop this country and a right for Guyanese to have a better life?
I would say this was like, look, Guyana, like other developing countries, are relegated to have to play by the same rules in the international system as others, including many of the Western countries. And for years, for decades, those same countries abided by those rules and with very little regard to climate change for decades and produced their oil and gas. Guyana should be afforded the same opportunity. And I understand that climate change is increasing and the world is slowly shifting to renewables, but I think that Guyana can do it. And the only difference between them playing by these same rules that other countries in decades past have played is that they're probably going to do it in a more responsible way. Because those other countries did it with little regard for climate change. There's more pressure on Guyana to be able to produce its oil and gas and also address climate change. So in a way, the Guyana doesn't handle oil and gas production or has an intent to that US, EU, other countries that are oil and gas producers have not been able to do or did not do.
On the technical side, the way I would answer that, I would say there are two things to be considered. One, any country that's producing, especially those that are just starting to produce, they should consider having a cap or an aim for where they want their CO2 emissions per capita. Because basically with what we do in the 21st century, we're going to emit carbon dioxide. It can get very intense based on the activities or the industries that you decide to sign up with. So say, for instance, Trinidad and Tobago probably still is in the top 10 of CO2 emitters per capita. And that's because we have a relatively small population, but then the activities income, and this is mainly in Point Lisa's industrial estate, that emits a lot of carbon dioxide, right, per capita. So that is something that a country could look at, because especially like in the case of Guyana, with an even smaller population, they could very easily, with certain industries that may not seem, highly polluting and so on, end up in the top 10 simply because you have a smaller population. So keep their eyes on that, and countries that we just spoke about without naming, but basically the US and Canada, US and China and so on, their CO2 emissions per capita is relatively high, and they could keep that down to half or some reasonable amount that would sustain development. And the second thing I would suggest for any country that is getting into oil and gas at this stage is to try and tie CO2 emitting activities to CO2 emission reduction activities. So, okay, this activity is going to produce this amount of CO2. So this is what we're going to do to remove that from the atmosphere, to have it just to keep it out of the atmosphere, remove it or prevent it from getting to the atmosphere. And so that way you can justify that you're developing sustainably and you have the numbers to show it. And the technology that I particularly work on is carbon capture and storage. And I would like to see Guyana at this stage of exploration and so on, identify potential geologic storage sites for carbon dioxide. All they would have to do is identify it, work out the capacity and so on. It's not a very expensive venture, but basically you say, okay, this is what we have set aside. If we start up any industries, this is where we can sequester our carbon dioxide, and overall our CO2 emissions are lower. So then it's clean without necessarily using.
Great. So a lot of what you said, as well as Wazim, comes back to regulations, regulators, the regulatory framework that we have in place, institutions being where they need to be able to implement these measures, track these measures, monitor what is happening in the country. So what do you say to those Let's dial back a bit to the first discovery, May of 2015. Less than 5 years later, by December 2019, Guyana was producing oil. Lisa Phase 2 just got started in February of this year. A third project, Payara, is going to come on stream. We have a fourth project, Yellowtail. ExxonMobil is already talking about the fifth project at Uraru. And we are seeing that by 2027, 2028, Guyana is going to be producing more than 1 million barrels of oil per day. What do you say to those who in commenting say that, look, you guys are moving too fast?
You know, what I would say is, you know, why not move so fast? I mean, it's you know, if you look at it and you disaggregate that to who oil can benefit, who these proceeds can benefit, it's everyday Guyanese. So are you supposed to tell them, look, we have this great opportunity, but we need to take a little time. Why don't you wait 10, 15 years to see your life transformed, to see you be able to access basic goods, basic services, and not just the Guyana, but the rest of the Caribbean as well. Like, I don't understand why wait. The Caribbean and Guyana are in such a precarious position, right? You think about climate change, but you think about the pandemic, you think about the volatility of the global system right now. You know, I don't understand why wait. I think develop as fast as you can. And I understand that it opens up a lot of possibility for things to go wrong, but it's not like Guyana and the rest of the Caribbean is not competent. There's lots of countries that have gone through rapid development. You know, Guyana has the ability, it has the know-how to reach out to external partners, to other countries, to other, you know, tap into resources for universities and things like that, to be able to sort of have that development and make sure that it's a successful one. There's a lot of negativity and pessimism when it comes to Guyana. They look at Guyana and say, oh, they're moving too fast and there's no way that there's no way that this can be successful. Why is it so difficult to be a little bit optimistic? Because with that optimism can draw in more people. The optimism should translate to say, okay, Guyana has a real opportunity, its people has a real opportunity. Let's put that next 10% of effort to get more technical trainings. Let's put that 10% more efforts to reach out to that next person to help with, you know, marketing the oil and gas or whatever it might be. So that's the way that I look at it.
And Lorraine, you want to win?
Yeah, I'm thinking, I understand why people would feel cautious, and I would, people are risk averse, and so they would want to go a little bit slower. But tying on what Wazim said, I would say focus not so much on how many, you know, the volumes and so on. Yes, all of that is great, but focus on, okay, within the next 5 years, not only are we going to have 1 million barrels per day, so on and so forth, this is what we're going to have, and put it to tangible things that the man in the street can see is going to benefit him. And that, oh, well, I don't want a new hospital in 5 years. No, give me it 15 years later. You know, then it's hard to argue, you know, say for instance, that was something in consideration. So instead of focusing on the rate of production and the rate of development on the production side, look at the rate of development and the things that will be coming to the people of Guyana, you know, going forward. I know it's difficult, you know, with, you know, the election. This is going to happen for sure. But, you know, basically tie in those revenues to infrastructure improvement and basically standard of living improvement. And I think that way people would appreciate it more, and it would be more difficult to discount having those benefits sooner than later.
And let's take a look now at Russia's invasion of Ukraine and the impact that is likely to have, not just in Europe, but across the world and here in Guyana. And, you know, let's start from the standpoint of how we ended up where we are. There are many people who believe that due to Venezuela's political situation and the policies of the Maduro administration there, and many companies having to leave that country, that the attention in part was then placed on Guyana, and it is then that the exploration and so on intensified and we discovered oil and we are where we are. We've seen over the last few days with the US now deciding that they're not going to import crude from from Russia, that a team of government officials from the United States, they were recently in Venezuela, and they seem to be looking back at their position on that country, of course, maybe as an alternative for the crude that they're not going to be able to get from Russia. How should we here in Guyana look at that in terms of any potential impact to our offshore development, and how can we look to capitalize on what the increase in oil prices itself is leading to?
I can take the first part of that question and say that right now it's hard to say why the Biden administration went to Venezuela. There's a release of the hostages, we know that there's been more dialogue there, but I don't think they went there with the main purpose to be importing Venezuelan oil, because it's just not politically feasible in US domestic politics, especially with midterm elections coming up and then national elections about 2 years away. They would get killed in Florida for this, which is a swing state and important to the Biden administration's intention to get reelected. I think the Biden administration saw this as an opportunity to ensure that Russia does not deepen its hold in Latin America and the Caribbean. And this could be a primary purpose. I think as over the next days or maybe a couple of weeks, we'll understand more and more why the intention was down there. I think what would have been nice to see from a Guyana perspective is that part of that dialogue, whether it's a big part or even a small part, maybe a one-liner, is to say that the sort of aggression that comes from Maduro and comes from Venezuela to Guyana's oil production is tapered a little bit, or is tempered a little bit, because, in a material way, Guyana's, Venezuela's military outnumbers Guyana's defense force 70-1, right? And it's a constant threat, not just for Guyanese, but even companies that want to invest in Guyana that will see that, and that will be a high risk for them. Should they invest in Guyana if Maduro continues to be unstable and acts aggressively or does something that hurts sort of Guyana's development or oil production? So I think there's a lot going on right now, and I think in the next couple of weeks we'll know more and more. But at the moment, I think that there's no immediate threat to Guyana at the moment.
My take on that is basically, of course, the high oil prices are attractive. Those should really be in contracts, how much benefit there would be to that. And I think overall with oil and gas, it's helpful to look at things on a longer term than, this, I would call it a spike. It's not going to stay. And I know some believe it's going to get up to even $200 per barrel, which would be amazing, but it would not stay there. Oil prices come down. And I think that is what we need to keep in mind. There's only so much you can do when it's high. And the main thing you can do when oil prices is high is have contracts that capitalize on that when it's happened, not, like at the time that it's happening, that you could do anything much. At least I can't think of much that you can do when you have high oil prices at that time. It has to be in your contract to deal with that situation. And it usually doesn't last very long. But I mean, these days anything can happen. But that's my overall take on it. Stay on course, and just remember that in contracts, to get those outlandish high numbers and outlandish low numbers, and be able to capture benefit in either way, and that would be something more to consider in negotiations. But these are things on a 25, 30, 40-year horizon, more 25, 30-year horizon. Yeah.
Great. So in the few minutes we have remaining, let's conclude on the matter of local content. As you both know, we now have a law in place here in Guyana that is going to be guiding how local content development is rolled out. But now that we have a legislation in place, and there would have been a lot of advocacy over the years, particularly driven by private sector groups and the Chamber of Commerce here in Guyana in particular, for us to have this in place. But now it's in place. Does that automatically mean that everyone is going to benefit and everything will be all right? What now needs to happen next?
I think, it's very clearly it's going to be implementation. It's very easy to have legislation in place, but a lot of countries have legislation in place. Whether or not it's implemented is always up for grabs. So I think is more of a focused effort on implementation and also understanding what needs to be amended, right? You never really know if this is working until you see the effects on the ground. So if we get to a certain period and we see that everyday Guyanese are not benefiting, then it's time to think again. It's time to rethink some of this to make sure that, my personal view is that at all times, the everyday Guyanese interest needs to be the highest priority. So,
well, you may have read what I wrote about that. My position is focused on education. There are people who will be graduating from secondary school and universities, and they're young professionals. They need to focus on bringing them up to speed in this particular sector and the support sectors there. We don't want to have the case where there are just not enough people to fill the slots that are available. The energy labor intensive, but as we know, there are several industries that will come out of this. I would really like to see action on secondary school education, what feeds into that, so that workforce that is coming up in the next 10 to 15 years are ready. And basically, it would get to the point where you didn't even need a local content legislation, because it's not the best. That is what I would want to see. That the Guyanese candidates are the best for the job, and I want to see that coming up with the new generation, those coming out of secondary school, those in their 20s, and some young professionals who would be in middle and probably even upper management.
Great. So thank you, Lorraine and Wazim, for joining us. I think we had a very spirited discussion. I look forward to having you on again as we continue to discuss the oil and gas development here in Guyana. Thank you both.